Michael Shane Bargo are sentenced to death.
We therefore unanimously find the sentence of death be imposed upon Austin Myers.
You will never see the light of day as a free man.
Each of these teens, for some bizarre reason, spiraled into the dark side, with their crimes so brutal and chilling that there is only one deserving sentence: death, right in the courtroom. Stick around as we unravel these stories that make you wonder just how evil the human mind can be, regardless of age. Austin Myers. The case of 19-year-old Austin Myers was highly controversial, partly due to the nature of his crime, but mostly because of the court's verdict, one that meant Myers would pay for his crime with his life.
We therefore unanimously find the sentence of death be imposed upon Austin Myers.
Let's head on to Warren County Court in Ohio, where this case takes place. Here, we'll rewind to when Myers, alongside an accomplice, brutally murdered their friend Justin Back for some supposed cash. In many murder cases, especially one that involves money, the victims are relatively unknown to the murderers. However, in this case, Austin Myers and Justin Back were actually friends who attended the same middle school. Hence, it was rather bizarre when the then 19-year-old Austin Myers, alongside his other friend Timothy Mosley, decided to rob Back's home because Myers claimed Back's stepfather, Mark Cates, had a safe containing about $20,000 and a gun left in the family home. Both teens drove to Back's family home in Waynesville, planning to burgle the safe, but they realized Back was home and decided against it. The two left and discussed how they could acquire the money, and it was at this point that Myers allegedly came up with the idea of killing Back. With this murderous intent in mind, the two went back to Back's home and ended up murdering their friend by strangling and stabbing him multiple times. Like that wasn't horrendous enough, the duo took his body to dispose of it behind a log in a field, but just before hiding the body, Myers once again fired 2 shots with the stolen gun from Myers. They say the universe has a twisted sense of humor because the safe that led to all of this bloodshed would eventually contain some loose change, paperwork, gun accessories, and no $20,000. Fortunately, the murder of Justin Back was traced to both boys who, during interviews at the police station, blamed each other for the murder. Now, the case gained attention because Timothy Mosley, who had used the knife to murder Back, entered a plea deal that left him with a life in prison without parole sentence.
Even more so than the death penalty. Because it is a hopeless and indefinite sentence.
Austin Myers, on the other hand, had to beg for his life as it was. Clear he was about to get the ultimate punishment.
Choose for me to die. It's only going to cause more pain and suffering for another family. Not me.
Despite his pleas, Myers received the death sentence, earning him the reputation of the youngest inmate on death row in Ohio at the time.
We therefore unanimously find the sentence of death be imposed upon Austin Myers.
Our next defendant, like Myers, went on a crazed frenzy that led to the death of another teenager. However, he would eventually find out that his punishment was a life for a life. Michael Bargo. People say love is the greatest, and in Michael Bargo's case, this seemed true, especially as he went as far as murdering 15-year-old Seth Jackson in what would be known as a deadly love triangle involving his 15-year-old girlfriend.
Accordingly, it is the judgment of the law and the sentence of the court that for the premeditated murder of Seth Jackson, you, Michael Shane Bargo, are sentenced to death.
Take a seat at Marion County District Court in Ocala, Florida, where Bargo is about to receive the ultimate punishment, one that ensured he was a dead man walking by the time he left the courtroom. This deadly love triangle first started with 15-year-old Seth Jackson and 15-year-old Amber Wright, who was in a relationship marred by constant fights. Things would get even worse when Jackson figured out Wright had been cheating on him with another teen, 18-year-old Michael Bargo, who was well known in the neighborhood as a troubled kid with somewhat of a violent streak. Realizing who Wright was involved with, Jackson decided to break off the relationship, but this didn't stop the now ex-couple from taking their nasty fights to Facebook, and many times Bargo was involved. In fact, Bargo harbored a great deal of hatred for Jackson. He was made to believe that Jackson had abused Wright. He would constantly threaten the former and was said to have once confronted Jackson at his home, saying, "I have a bullet with your name on it." Still, one would never expect this teenage love affair to spill into something more deadly, right? Unfortunately, that was what happened. On April 17th, 2011, Bargo informed his friend Kyle Hooper of his plan to eventually get rid of Jackson. Hooper wasn't the one in on this devious plan. Bargo also informed Wright and his other friends Justin Soto and Charlie Ely. In fact, Wright was the bait who would lure Jackson over with talks of wanting to work things out. At first, Jackson was suspicious of her request, but went ahead and met up with her at Ely's trailer. As soon as he got there, the boys attacked him, and eventually, Bargo shot him multiple times. Determined to keep up with his violent streak, he shot Jackson in the face, wrapped the lifeless body in a sleeping bag, and threw it into a fire pit. The remains were then put in buckets and thrown into a quarry. Perhaps greatly disturbed by what had transpired, Hooper confessed to his mother, and soon all teens involved were arrested. Bargo, who was the mastermind behind the chilling act, was charged with first-degree murder, and for that, he was to pay for the murder of Seth Jackson with his own life.
Accordingly, it is the judgment of the law and the sentence of the court that for the premeditated murder of Seth Jackson, you, Michael Shane Bargo, are sentenced to death.
The other teens were also sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the time of his sentencing in 2013, Bargo became Florida's youngest inmate on death row. In 2021, he was resentenced to death. Like Bargo, our next kid committed a chilling crime, but there was a twist to his case. He wasn't sentenced to death, but having multiple life sentences meant his life was done for. Nikolas Cruz. The name Nikolas Cruz is one that will always be remembered in America's dark history of school shootings. On Valentine's Day, he brutally shot and ended the lives of 17 people because he didn't feel loved.
Count 1 of the indictment, the murder in the first degree of Luke Hoyer. The court imposes a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Now we take our seat at the 17th Judicial Circuit of Florida in Fort Lauderdale, where Cruz, although saved by a non-unanimous jury, would spend the rest of his life behind bars, never to be a free man again. Before Nikolas Cruz became an infamous American mass murderer, he appeared to be a regular teen, or at least that was what those who knew him thought. However, Cruz had behavioral issues since preschool and was even diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. Due to these, he was transferred between schools 6 times in 3 years to deal with these problems, yet nothing seemed to work. Cruz continued to prove he was troubled, and at some point, psychiatrists recommended an involuntary admission to a residential treatment facility starting in 2013. Later in 2016, he was being investigated by the Florida Department of Children and Families after he made a series of posts on Snapchat posts where he cut both his arms and said he planned to buy a gun. Despite this disturbing behavior, a mental institution claimed he was at low risk of harming himself or others. Well, on February 14, 2018, Cruz, armed with an AR-15 style rifle, made his way to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and shot 17 people to death while injuring another 17. He then escaped by blending in with other students, but was eventually apprehended hours later. At the time, it was the deadliest high school shooting in U.S. history, surpassing the Columbine High School massacre on April 20, 1999, in which 13 people were killed. At his initial arraignment the day after the shootings, Cruz was charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder and held without bond. However, on March 7, 2018, a grand jury indicted Cruz on a total of 34 charges, including 17 counts of first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted first-degree murder. On March 13th, the prosecutors filed notice of their intent to seek the death penalty. On July 18, 2022, his death penalty trial officially began, and details of his horrid crimes were presented in court, including an 18-page list of search queries from various Google accounts, including searches such as how to become a school shooter. In the end, the jury recommended that Cruz be sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a decision that didn't sit well with nearly all of the murdered victims' families. In their victim impact statements, they all expressed this disappointment and wished him death.
My prayer for my birthday present is to get word that you are dead.
And I will celebrate when you die. I heard you saying that you don't want to suffer. You don't like painful things. You understand that you will suffer and you will go through pain, a lot of pain.
On November 2, 2022, Cruz was sentenced to 34 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Count 1 of the indictment, the murder in the first degree of Luke Hoyer. The court imposes a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
one each for the total number of victims he murdered and wounded. Like Cruz, our next defendant was about to face instant karma in the courtroom after she murdered her mother after the older woman found out about her decadent double life. Madison Gregg. 15-year-old Carly Madison Gregg makes it to our list after she brutally murdered her mother and attempted to do the same to her stepfather. You may be curious to know why. Well, her mother had found out about her drug use, proving that evil sometimes came in young packages. The chilling part, her murderous acts were all captured on the home's surveillance camera. Next, we take a seat at Rankin County District Court in Mississippi, where Gregg's fate is about to be sealed in court. 15-year-old Carly Madison Gregg lived with her mother, 40-year-old Ashley Smiley, and her stepfather, Heath Smiley, in Mississippi. To those who knew her, she was a regular teen who lived in a home where she was well cared for. Her mother was a math teacher at Northwest Rankin High School, where Gregg was a student. According to court records, on March 19, 2024, a friend of Gregg's was so worried about the teen's constant use of marijuana, her ownership of several burner phones, and her habit of constantly getting high that he decided to spill to Ashley. As expected, every mother would be disappointed to learn such about their child, but Gregg claimed her mother's approval meant so much to her that when she learned that she had been outed, she decided to kill her mother. While we are not quite sure how this rationale made sense to the teen, when she returned home from school with her mother, she went straight to her parents' bedroom and retrieved a .357 Magnum handgun. Gregg, wearing a Nirvana t-shirt, was seen on the family's surveillance footage wandering around the house, clearly agitated while holding something behind her back. Moments later, she was seen facing the camera before leaving the room. Mere minutes later, what sounded like gunshots rang out, and a woman's screams were heard. Moments later, Gregg is captured on the camera returning to the kitchen, still holding the weapon. She then slid onto a stool at the counter and grabbed what was said to be her mother's phone. She texted her stepfather, luring him to the house while the family dogs were seen hovering around her. At the same time, it was revealed that she had invited a friend over, and when the friend arrived, she asked her if she had ever seen a dead body before, and then directed the friend to where her mother lay dead. Nearly an hour later, Heath, her stepfather, arrived at the house, and as soon as he opened the door, Gregg fired a shot aimed at his face but missed. He then struggled with her and was able to grab the gun before frantically calling the police to report what had happened.
Okay, sir. Where's your wife? She's dead on the floor of my stepdaughter's room.
Madison Gregg was arrested and charged with murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence. Her defense team based their argument on insanity, arguing that she had a history of depression, self-harm, and even took prescription medication.
We believe the evidence will show that Carly's parents, who lived with her, were not aware that Carly was suffering from a mental illness.
However, prosecutors countered this claim, highlighting her deliberate actions, from planning the murder to luring her stepfather home and even inviting a friend to come see her mother's lifeless body. Now here's where things got pretty interesting. Gregg was offered a plea deal of 40 years in prison, but she declined. Instead, her team insisted on their insanity defense. Unfortunately, that didn't get them the verdict they had hoped for. In fact, Gregg was found guilty of all 3 charges, and in the end, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It's impossible to talk about crazy teens without mentioning our next defendant, who committed one of the most gruesome crimes when he beheaded his classmate. Matthew Borges. When you hear crimes that involve extreme cruelty, the last thing you'd expect is for the perpetrator to be a young person. However, 15-year-old Matthew Borges proved to be the very personification of evil after he stabbed his victim 76 times and patiently dismembered him in a teen love affair gone wrong.
I will impose a term of 30 years to life also on the theory of murder.
Let's head to Salem Superior Court in Massachusetts, where Borges is about to face brutal karma in the courtroom for the grisly crime. In December 2016, 16-year-old Valoria Paulino's mutilated body was found on the banks of the Merrimack River by a dog walker. The body has no head or hands. Upon further examination, medical personnel found 76 wounds on the slain teenager's body, and it was hard to determine if those wounds and the beheading happened before his death. In fact, his hands were never recovered to this day.
As I approached, I got closer. I saw her really sniffing at a particular area. So I pulled her back, and when I looked, I kind of second-guessed myself. I thought I saw a dead body, but I wasn't too sure because, it was missing some limbs.
Following an intense investigation, it was discovered that the perpetrator of such a grisly crime was none other than 15-year-old Matthew Borges, the victim's classmate. Both teens were students at Lawrence High School in Massachusetts. According to the prosecution's argument, Borges had stabbed and decapitated his classmate in a jealous fit after the victim was seen hanging out with Borges' girlfriend. The prosecution also added that Viloria Paulino, who was an aspiring poet, had been called out of his home by Borges while other teens robbed it before killing Viloria Paulino himself. Due to the atrocious nature of the crime, Borges was consequently tried as an adult for the murder. Borges' defense attorney claimed his client was a child at the time of the murder, so he had the potential to be rehabilitated, but this did nothing to sway the minds of those who heard the details of the crime. The initial murder trial in 2016 lasted 10 days, while the jury deliberation lasted about 9 hours. Before the sentencing, the victim's mother, Katiuska Paulino, gave heartbreaking testimony about what the family had suffered after the abrupt death of their son. She described the family after their anguish as the living dead.
And in spite of us standing here today, we're living dead after he was brutally ripped from our side.
In the end, Borges was handed 2 life sentences with the possibility of parole after 30 years.
I will impose a term of 30 years to life also on the theory of murder.
Like Borges, the next crazy teen on our list committed one of the most gruesome school shootings in America's recent history, and for that, his fate and freedom to live was sealed. Ethan Crumbley. 15-year-old sophomore student Ethan Crumbley always believed he was going to commit a school shooting, and even though there were many chances to ensure this never happened, it did. On November 30th, 2021, Crumbley opened fire at Oxford High School, killing 4 and injuring 7 others.
So I ask you, do you feel like a 15-year-old, now 17, that put so much time and effort into this attack deserves to ever step out of those prison walls one day?
Let's head to Oakland County Circuit Court, where this young teen is about to receive a sentence that could very well have been the death penalty, since he was never going to be a free man again. As a young teen, Crumbley was troubled and was said to have been suffering from depression after his family dog died and his only friend moved at the end of October 2021. As early as March 2021, it was revealed that Crumbley started sending his mother disturbing texts about his state of mind, which included talks of demons and ghosts inside his home. He often videotaped himself torturing animals, made Molotov cocktails, and joked about committing a school shooting. Despite knowing this, his parents allegedly never sought therapy for him following any of those incidents or behaviors. Several times, the school authorities invited them to discuss Crumbley's behavior, yet they never took it seriously, not even when a teacher caught him using his phone to search for ammunition, or when another found a disturbing drawing he had made. In fact, they went ahead and gifted him a firearm, frequently visited a shooting range, and claimed shooting sports are a family hobby. Even when the school reported to Crumbley's mother, she simply texted her son, writing, "LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught." On November 30th, 2021, the day of the shooting, Crumbley's parents were advised to seek counseling for their son within 48 hours. Otherwise, the school would call Child Protective Services. However, they resisted the idea of taking their son home at the time, and neither did they inform school officials that they had purchased a gun for him 4 days earlier. At 10:54 p.m., they left the school, and shortly after, Crumbley committed the school shooting. Crumbley was charged as an adult with 24 crimes, including murder and terrorism. The severity of the charges reflected the gravity of the act of violence he had committed. Crumbley pleaded guilty to all charges in October 2022, and his guilty plea spared the victims' families the pain of a lengthy trial. But it did not diminish the emotional toll that the events had taken on their lives. The legal proceedings also extended to Crumbley's parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, who were charged with involuntary manslaughter for their failure to secure the gun used in the shooting. The victim impact statements from the families of the victims were an emotional affair, and the courtroom was charged with varying emotions, all seeking release.
For everything that we have experienced that's hard and felt impossible, the shooter, this monster, should have to feel everything hard and painful and impossible.
In the end, Ethan Crumbley, accepting his fate, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Like Crumbley, our next defendant was about to face instant karma in the courtroom after going on a shooting spree that ended the lives of 10 people. Peyton Gendron. Being a mass murderer is bad enough, but being one who brutally murdered because he felt the color of his skin was superior was extremely diabolical.
There is no place for you or your ignorant, hateful, and evil ideologies in a civilized society.
That was exactly how vile Peyton Gendron was when, at just 18 years old, he orchestrated the May 2022 Buffalo shooting that led to the death of 10 black people. His reason? He held white supremacist views and wanted to take out black people. Peyton S. Gendron was who you'd typically refer to as a quirky, quiet teen. Before he rose to infamy, he was described by those who knew him as a loner who rarely attended in-person classes and even exhibited several bizarre behaviors, including a hazmat suit to class. However, above his quirkiness, Gendron was a white supremacist and had even researched hate-motivated attacks and shootings before his act. Before the shooting, Gendron supposedly wrote and released online a 180-page manifesto on Google Docs, along with his 673-page online diary that showed his anti-Semitic, white supremacist views. He also expressed support for far-right mass shooters Dylan Roof and Brenton Tarrant. According to the documents, Gendron targeted Buffalo because it was the city closest to his home that had the most black residents. On May 14, 2022, Gendron made his way to the Top supermarket on Jefferson Avenue, armed with a Bushmaster XM15 AR-15 style rifle illegally modified to accept high-capacity magazines, wearing body armor, a military helmet, and a head-mounted camera, through which he live-streamed the attack on the online service Twitch. He first shot 4 people in the parking lot, killing 3 before entering the supermarket and opening fire on the shoppers.
When I first saw him shooting, he shot a woman, he shot a deacon, he shot another woman, and then he went in the store and started shooting again.
Once he was done, Gendron went to the front of the building where patrol officers were able to talk him into dropping his gun after he wanted to commit suicide. He was arrested, but the damage was done. The lives of 10 African Americans were cut short and 3 others were injured. On November 28, 2022, Gendron pled guilty to 15 state-level counts, 10 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted murder motivated by hate, criminal weapons possession, and domestic terrorism motivated by hate. He apologized for his heinous act, but who could really forgive someone like him?
I'm very sorry for all the pain I forced the victims and their families to suffer through. I'm very sorry for stealing the lives of your loved ones. I cannot express how much I regret all the decisions I made leading up to my actions on May 14th. I did a terrible thing that day.
On February 15, 2023, he was denied youthful offender status and deservedly received 11 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 90 years.
There can be no mercy for you, no understanding, no second chances. The damage you have caused is too great, and the people you have hurt are too valuable to this community. You will never see the light of day as a free man.
His federal trial has been slated for September 8, 2025, and the Department of Justice announced it would be going for the death penalty. And with that, we've come to the end of this video on dangerous kids who were killed in court. For more fascinating videos like this, click on the cards showing on your screen for more, and we'll be waiting.